Today's story is Waterborne by I Promise I'm Not a Raccoon. Before this whole pandemic situation went down, I, along with a few friends, had scraped together enough cash to go traveling abroad. It wasn't a crazy amount, we certainly didn't have enough money to spend any considerable amount of time in absolute luxury, but we did have enough to bum around and have some fun as broke college kids. With our limited pool of cash and the choice between Malaysia and Thailand, we decided on Thailand. The flight from Washington to Thailand was long, to say the least. Our exhaustion and jet lag far outweighed the protests coming from our wallets as we booked our room at a dingy motel in Qatar. When we opened the door, our cheers of joy turned to groans of disgust as we flicked the lights on and saw numerous roaches scatter off to find cover. We had arrived sometime in the night. In our restless and tired state, time had become meaningless. If it wasn't for Jeremiah, our group's only working brain cell, and his alarm, we would have happily overslept and missed our connecting flight. As the 6 of us crammed into a room, really only meant for one, we called it a night. It felt like I had just closed my eyes when the alarm sounded. I think the closest thing I've seen to a rabid person was how feral we all became hearing that awful marimba. All we really had to do was stand up and leave, given how we had just passed out, 0.2 seconds after stepping in, which thankfully made checking out much faster. As I stretched, I saw Jeff swat off a huge-looking cockroach who had tried to make a nest inside his shirt. "I hate these fucking things," he groaned. "They creep me out. Ain't no creature need that many legs." I heard Beth's muffled voice chime out from behind the bathroom door. "You better not swat at them. Pregnant roaches give birth if they're being attacked. I saw it on YouTube when this ant guy—" "I don't want to know, Beth," Jeff said with a squirm. "I already know enough. God made me stupid on purpose, so don't go screwing that up." With a chuckle, we left it at that. By the skin of our teeth and the good grace of God, we barely made it on the flight. Once we landed in Bangkok, it felt like we had reached the promised land. We spent the first 2 days partying, jumping from bar to bar, and feeding off the hole-in-the-wall restaurants. Although I can barely remember any specific details, other than Jeff's alarmingly hairy back while he was practically twerking on the table shirtless, it was a blast. On the 3rd day, learning absolutely nothing from that awful hangover, we bought a case of beer and headed off to see the beautiful wilderness of Thailand. Now, I know how that sounds. A group of dumb, drunk college foreigners wandering off into the woods doesn't exactly sound like a champion move. But to our credit, we were really only exploring the touristy areas. The only real deviation was when we broke off to take a dip in the lake. Or should I say when I broke off to take a dip in the lake. Thailand is hot. So hot, in fact, that any source of water feels like a godsend to anyone like me who cracks at 90-degree heat. So when I saw that beautiful blue peeking out behind those trees, I happily broke away from the pack and made my way over. The only obstacle in my way was a fence, but seeing as how it wasn't too heavily barbed or anything, I made quick work of it. God, let me tell you right now, there is nothing better than an ice-cold dip on a hot, sunny day. As I dove in, I felt the cold embrace me like the arms of a long-lost lover, and never again would I take air conditioning for granted like I had before. When I came up for air, I heard the group coming closer. I had expected them to join me, but to my surprise, they stopped at the fence. "Sam!" Cindy yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" Cindy was the group's voice of reason. While Jeremiah had the brains, most of it seemed to dissolve the moment there was any fun to be had. As a result, Cindy played a vital, if somewhat thankless, role in stopping us from killing ourselves. As she stared at me, I smiled back. "I'm enjoying myself, that's what I'm doing." "Did you hop the fence?" "No, I tunneled." I grinned at her while she narrowed her eyes at me. "Sam, you need to get out," Jeremiah said as he edged closer. "The fence is there for a reason. If they haul your dumbass out to jail for trespassing, I swear to God, we will leave you behind." I looked around, only to see a few animals further up ahead carefully watching as they themselves enjoyed a dip. Although our marching had brought us deep into the rural Thailand, it wasn't like we were miles away from town, so it wasn't hard to think that maybe I really was trespassing. I had been shouting back at them trying to defend myself when, almost like clockwork, I watched as two older men came out of the bushes. As one bent down to drink, I locked my eyes with the one further behind. I could feel the molten anger only the elderly can harness. If I had to guess how old he was, just standing there, I would say a cool 85 at least, but seeing the blurry streak he had become in action, it made me reconsider. Now, I don't speak Thai, and no one there did, but you didn't have to speak it to understand that he said some very colorful things. I just about flew over the fence before he was at my heels. As we ran, we watched him shake his fist at us, screaming what was undoubtedly a rainbow of profanity. When we finally felt safe, we slowed down, and poor Jeff looked like he had jumped in instead of me. They each stared daggers at me for the briefest of moments, the weight of the situation sinking in. They had just watched my smug, soaked ass nearly drown trying to doggy paddle away after getting chased out, then jump a near 10 foot over a 3-foot fence at Mach 3 speed. They've never even seen me jog before, let alone complete an impromptu triathlon to escape a 4-foot-tall ball of elderly rage. As all that dawned on us, we couldn't help but laugh. "Jesus Christ, Sammy," Jeff said, still wheezing. "I swear to God, you scared the ever-loving shit out of a monkey just hanging out in one of the bushes. You two were running side by side for a moment there." Beth was doubled over with tears in her eyes, laughing like an out-of-shape hyena. "The fucking look on your face!" I watched as she struggled to contain herself long enough to recreate it before just giving up. Oh, dear God, I think I'm gonna puke. I hated to admit it, but it was pretty funny. After all, I had made it out almost untouched, save for the cut on my leg I must have got coming back over the fence. Once the laughter had died down, we decided to keep marching on, with the exception of one very forward old woman who had taken a liking to Jeremiah. We had no more old people chasing us down for the rest of the evening. Arriving late to our hotel rooms and somewhat drunk, we called it a successful day. As I laid awake that night, scratching myself like crazy from the dirty lake water, I saw the pus leak out of the cut on my leg as I began to feel the faint trace of something wrong. And at first, it wasn't noticeable. The discomfort climbing up my body and nesting in my head had only reached a mild thumping maybe a week later when we were forced to go back because of the rising scare of COVID. The ride home was somber, if a little nerve-wracking. Although no one said it, I could see the worry dancing across my friends' faces. We'd be forced to split for who knows how long until things got better. As we touched back home, I felt my head start to thump. Quarantine was awful. It was for all of us. I lived alone, which, while it got rid of the fear of infection, meant I would run the risk of going stir-crazy. If it wasn't for FaceTime and Netflix, I'm pretty sure I'd have lost my mind a long time ago. It was only a month and a half later when my head got worse. Gradually, it became a nuisance. The mild thumping turned into a pulsating pain. I started to down headache pills like candy, anything that would just make it go away. Sometimes at night, I could swear it would move up and down my skull, and when I rubbed the throbbing vein in my head, it felt like massaging a pile of dead worms. It only kept building and building. At one point, I had to actively fight the urge to scream. The pain made me break out in a sweat as my skull threatened to split itself in half. I couldn't visit the hospital. I'd seen the news. Even if I didn't get the virus on arrival, those places were packed to the brim. If I had anything, I'm sure they'd kick me out or put me on the back burner since it wasn't virus-related. So, I grit my teeth and pushed through it alone. The only rest I could get was when I passed out because of the pain. It was hell on earth up until one day 3 months into quarantine. I had passed out because of the pain, but when I woke up I felt nothing. No headache, no hurt, just nothing. It was like it had never even happened. If I hadn't been so drowsy because of the headache pills, I would have danced for joy. I don't believe in miracles, but whichever patron saint blessed me with that magic, I would happily gift them my left testicle to say thank you. I enjoyed those few days. Although I still feel something threateningly slithering around ready to act up, it never got as bad as before. It was only when I was brushing my teeth when it hit me why. I was on autopilot, working the bristles across my mouth when I felt my left eye start to twitch. I felt it before I saw the movement. I could barely react as my eye was squeezed against its socket. Slowly, as if to check if it was safe, a black, thread-like object wriggled out of my eyelid. It seemed to grow and thicken as my eye was pushed aside. It was hanging out now at least 2 inches in midair as I froze in place. I wanted to scream as I watched it in the mirror, but I knew if I did, I could alert it and risk it crawling back inside of my head. As slowly as I could, I brought my hand up to pull it out. My hand was about neck level before it turned its pointed head to face me. It must have been the size and length of a shoelace by now, but as it stared me in the face, I couldn't help but see it as a terrifying snake. I watched as the black worm-like creature pushed itself forcefully back into my eye socket. I felt shivers of violation and horror rip through my body as its vile, slimy surface washed its coarse, oily thorax in my watery eyes. It had nearly disappeared completely when I finally pinched and took a hold of it. It threatened to wriggle out of my grasp as its movements caused vibrations in my vision. When I pulled it, I could feel it fighting back. For a moment, I felt triumphant as its shiny black body appeared more and more. I did until I felt it wrap around behind my eye. The little fucker had anchored itself on my optic nerve. As I pulled once more, I felt the riptide of agony as my eye threatened to come out of its socket bit by bit. That's when, in my panic, I made a decision. I frantically pulled at the bathroom drawers until I found my pair of hair-cutting scissors. Slipping the blade between what little of its greasy body was still left exposed, I took a deep breath and I cut. I felt its body writhe inside me frantically as a new problem appeared. While I had chopped off its head, the body was still alive and turning as fast as it could to return from where it had come. The thought of this thing still living inside me made my body run cold. The thin liquid it called blood had started to blind me as it seared and drenched my eye, and as its fat body wriggled away, it was taking full advantage of the distraction my torment brought about. As it hurriedly attempted to disappear, I knew what I had to do. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the first spoon I saw. I could feel its mangled body writhe inside of me. When I made it back in front of the mirror, I watched the last trace of it vanish as I steadied myself. Burring the lip of the spoon against my eye and the bottom lip of my eyelid, I pushed. I felt the cold metal send a wave of pain through me as my eye was forced out of place. From behind the now empty socket, a large curling strand of shiny black flopped out, squirming frantically for cover. I could still see it wrap around my now dangling eye, my vision split and slowly bathing in red as I worked. I took both hands and screamed as I buried my fingers in, desperate for a hold on it. I pulled as hard as I could. It felt like a horrible eternity before I slammed the now finger-thick black noodle flopped against the counter. My eye still dangling and it fighting crazily as it wrapped around my arm, I took it and shoved it inside a Tupperware container. The happiness only lasted a moment before I saw the carnage. Blood was flowing like a river out of the empty hole my eye had once sat. In the scuffle, the worm had pulled out the surrounding yet still pulsating veins. They seemed to collapse on themselves and lay nesting as they poked out past the skin of my eyelid. The veins sickeningly throbbed faster and faster as my remaining eye spotted the still chunk of something wrinkly dangling in the middle of the socket. Without thinking, I rushed to the hospital, feeling fainter by the second. My vision was starting to dim and blur. With every collision of outside contact against my still hanging eye, a flood of excruciating pain exploded through me. My only saving grace was the emptiness of the streets in the pandemic. I barely made it 5 feet into the emergency room before I collapsed in a bloody puddle on the floor. I was out before I even hit the ground. I was lucky that the hospital I had gone through had a few available nurses. Although I had brought the thing in with me, they had no idea what it was. The best they could describe it was a waterborne parasite I must have contracted while swimming abroad. They said that most people contract them from rural areas, even in the US, with untreated water and without even realizing it. When I had been asked to describe the trip, it all clicked. I must have cut my leg on the wire climbing it the first time without noticing, and when I jumped into the water, it must have crawled in through the open wound. The doctor theorized it made its way up my body as it traveled between the skin. When I mentioned the strength of the headaches, they brought me in for an x-ray that revealed a small hole near the back of my head. They speculated that the discomfort and pain I had felt was it eating surrounding tissue and boring its way through my skull. Since there are no pain receptors in the brain, I couldn't feel a thing once it was actually inside. A brain scan revealed that I had been lucky it stopped at bone and tissue. Nothing was missing or affected by the parasite. I spent a few weeks there before I was discharged just to be safe and monitor any signs of danger. I didn't mind. It felt good to get answers, and all I needed as a final good to go was the lab result from the parasite. The day they came in, I had been notified early in the morning. I had been dressed and waiting on my paperwork. I'd been tying my shoe when the doctor came in. She had been holding a small packet of papers when she spoke. Well, the results are in, and I'm glad to say it tested negative for all clinical examinations. Other than a nasty experience, you'll be just fine from here on out. I smiled as I shook her hand, eager to know anything I could. Any idea what it was, Doc? Her face seemed to light up as she spoke. I actually came to talk to you about that. It seems we stumbled on a new type of parasite. When we tested this particular female specimen for relation to existing family structures, we found a surprising connection to that of Paraplaneta, or as you may know it, the cockroach. It seems you stumbled on one of its lesser-known relatives. Although I was glad to finally know what it was, there was something about it that made me feel uneasy. So, just to make absolutely sure, I'm gonna be okay, right, Doc? There's nothing I should be on the lookout for? She paused for a moment, although she didn't seem particularly worried. Well, you got the whole thing out, and it tested negative for any possible concerning diseases. I can assure you, even if there is a little part of it left, it was doomed to die eventually from the moment you attacked it and cut its head off in your apartment. While it's a fact that normal roach relatives can live without a head, like this one, it too will die. And leave nothing behind. I assure you, there's no need to worry, you're going to be fine. With a shaky smile, I thanked her and marched off. All the while, something about that roach part kept eating away at my mind. I didn't have too much time to dwell on it. News had gotten around that I'd been let go, and since the restrictions had been eased back a bit, we had planned on getting a burger and some milkshakes and heading back to my place. When we got there, we spent the rest of the evening retelling stories to our friends who hadn't gone. We told them about the giant roaches in Qatar, the bar scene in Bangkok, Beth throwing up on some poor girl after one too many mojitos. I had finished up my burger and had begun working my way through my milkshake when Jeff started talking about the monkey and made me laugh so hard that shake came out of my nose. I excused myself to get a towel to clean up my mess and the nosebleed that followed. As I made my way to the back from the kitchen with my napkins, I heard the talking slowly tapering off. Everyone had been transfixed, staring at something sitting on the table. "What's the matter?" I said with a laugh. "You guys never seen milk come out of a guy's nose before?" My eyes darted across their pale faces as Jeremiah met my eyes. Sam, He trailed off, looking as if he saw a ghost. As my eyes saw the pile of red and white on the counter, I realized why. There in the bloody slush were hundreds of tiny black worms swimming frantically. As my body went cold and my heart turned to ice, I felt a gentle throb of pain from the back of my head. Hey there, friends. I hope you all enjoyed that story. That was once again Waterborne by I Promise I'm Not a Raccoon, and it's a really neat horror story with a parasite. If you did enjoy that story and like more content like this, or content that is so vastly different, I don't have a comparison today, I'm sorry. Please consider joining Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, and that makes you part of the Nevermore. You can also do things to support the Nevermore, such as following me on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, etc., or supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. I don't really have much to say today, just kind of wanted to get this outro out of the way, so I hope you have a great day, fantastic week, I'll see you on the next video, but until then, friends, sleep well.